Hello everyone and welcome to my vlog of the Booktube Prize Octafinals. So I have fiction for the Octafinals round and I'm going to tell you which 6 books I have. So I have Detransition Baby by Torrey Peters, The Sentence by Louise, Erdrich, Fight Night by Miriam Toews, Hell of a Book by Jason Mott, The Final Revival of Opal and Nev by Dawnie, Walton, and Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen. So I have read Detransition Baby and I have literally just finished Crossroads. So I'm going to discuss those with you. I have managed to get The Final Revival of Opal and Nev by Dawnie, Walton. I reserved this and it came in at the library. And I have on my phone the ebook of Hell of a Book. So I also have bought from Waterstones The Sentence by Louise Erdrich, so I have a physical copy that's at my mum's house at the moment. I literally just have to wait for Fight Night to come in, so I think that'll be the end of March, but hopefully by then everything else will be read and I can read that quite quickly. So finishing Crossroads, Detransition Baby and Crossroads I think are both sat at a 4 out of 5 stars. I have my notes from when I read Detransition Baby in September because I keep a book log of just my initial thoughts and feelings so that I can go back to that if I ever want to kind of look back on my reading life and experience and the rating. So it comes in quite useful sometimes when you've already read the book and you need to remind yourself for the Booktube Prize. So Detransition Baby follows the protagonist Ames, who was previously Amy, so she detransitioned. She was a transgender female and then she detransitioned back into a male. And she ends up having a relationship with her boss at work, who is a cisgendered female called Katrina, and she gets Katrina pregnant, and then Ames thinks it's a great idea to bring her ex into the mix, who is a transgender female called Reese. And it's a look at the idea of a different way of looking at motherhood. So Ames really thinks that having a motherhood, sisterhood between Katrina and Reese could really help the upbringing of the baby. And it's a look at Katrina's choice as well as a sister woman, and her relationship to Reese, how she feels about her as her current partner's ex, but also as a transgender female, and how Katrina's a cis female. How they look at motherhood in very different ways. I remember it as a really interesting, thought-provoking book. I think a lot of people on this prize will rate this very highly because I think it's accessible to many different readers. It's contemporary, it's quite quick to read, and it's looking at very contemporary current issues around gender and sexuality that are very prominent right now, that are very topical right now, and this was done really well. I think Torrey Peters is transgender. I'm not entirely sure, so don't quote me on that, but I think it's come from a place of knowledge and a place of wanting to educate readers, and I remember being really enamoured with the current topics that were being raised about motherhood, about relationships, about sexuality and gender. I think my personal preference would lead me at the moment to put Crossroads above Detransition Baby, purely on the basis of my enjoyment level. It's quite hard to remember how much I enjoyed Detransition Baby because it was a few months ago now. But obviously Crossroads is quite fresh in my mind. The main criticism I'll have of Crossroads is that it was incredibly lengthy and it could have been shortened down. But I am a bit of a sucker for sweeping family sagas, and essentially that's what Crossroads is. Now I know Jonathan Franzen as an author is pretty controversial. I know he said some interesting things about women, and he's had a lot of issues with Oprah, and the idea of kind of he represents very white middle class snobbery. But parking all his controversy to the side, because I think as judges we really need to just mark the works, the books, the works of fiction as opposed to the author, so I don't want to get into that, so I'm judging without any of that really inflecting my opinion. So Crossroads is set in the 70s in Chicago, and it follows the Hildebrandt family. So it has Russ, who is the pastor of the local area, and there's a youth group set up called Crossroads, and a few of the children in Russ's family end up attending Crossroads, and it all centres around this small, very religious community. Now, religious communities aren't really my go-to for fiction, but I was quite enamoured with the individual characters of the family, so a lot of the chapters are the individuals of that family, and each of them have set chapters dedicated to the micro dramas going on in their lives. So we have Russ, who's the pastor, Marion, who's his wife, then we have Clem, the oldest son, Becky, the next in line, Perry, and what's the youngest called? I'll call him Jay. I forgot what name he has, but he doesn't really have a chapter because it's assumed he's a little bit too young. So it goes through relationship dramas between the parents, but the parents with their children, and trying to assemble themselves in the community. It raises topics on religion, and particularly the quest for religion. That's quite a prominent part of the book. With Russ and Clem and Perry in particular, and Marion, they muse on religion and how they've come to it, and their religion being tested. It discusses mental health, particularly Perry has a lot of issues with his mental health in the novel. Identity. Becky deals with a big growing social group and how she navigates those waters, especially when issues arise. And the relationships between siblings and the parents with the children was really interesting. I found it really compelling. It was a 24-hour audiobook, so I've slowly got through it. I am on the 15th or 16th of February and I finally finished it, but I was listening to it in the car and when I've been walking, and sometimes in my room I've just been playing it for a few hours. And usually I find audiobooks really hard to carry on with because I find that I get distracted, or if I'm driving or if I'm doing something else I can't keep in with it. But the way it was narrated and the language of the book meant that you could have elements where if you had to zone out because you're at a roundabout, for example, you could still follow the thread of the story, which I thought was really great, because I didn't miss anything. Yeah, I think the only issue was that it was quite lengthy. I think the last few hours of the audiobook could have been snipped because the ending of the book was kind of a bit ambiguous. It kind of rolled through a lot of potential issues for the next things that might arise in the family and then just kind of stopped it there a little bit. For example, I think Becky's ending was quite rushed. I don't think she got the ending she deserved as a character. But it's very like Anne Tyler novels, this particular book, and if you're a fan of Anne Tyler novels and those different relationships within a family, then I think this will really appeal to you. It had a lot to say about the Navajo community as well, so it had a lot of really interesting topics, and it did obviously raise Vietnam as well. And I think Detransition Baby definitely has a lot more to say, but on a pleasure kind of scale, I enjoyed this book more. I found the narration was really great, the voice was really soothing, and I could really get straight into the story. I found the narrative really compelling and interesting to me. I don't know if it will be to everyone's taste, but I just thought as a judge I'm just going to rate it purely on what I enjoy most, because I've done this prize now the judging of this prize for 2 years, and it seems majority of the time judges do not align with my taste at all. So when the results come out, I'm always a bit surprised, because it's very rarely as I've predicted based on my rankings. So I've decided to throw caution to the wind this time around and not really think about the psyche of what the other judges might like, and just put what I like down, and then if they get kicked, they get kicked. I was quite lucky. I think, was it fiction or non-fiction last year? But 2 out of the 3 ended up being in the top 3 positions that I predicted in my final round, so that was really great. But usually this early on, most of the ones I love get kicked. A few that I love make it right to the end, and that's always satisfying. But yeah, I've noticed that fiction, non-fiction, I don't know how translated is going to go this year, but those 2 categories, what I think people will love, never kind of works out. So anyway, yeah, so I'm going to, at the moment, put Crossroads as number 1 and then Detransition Baby as number 2, but obviously as I read more of the books, they will shift a little bit, and then we'll start to get more of a pattern, I think, when the next 2 books are finished, of where things are going to sit, because I don't know if Detransition Baby will end up making it into the top 3, based on the ranking it is at now, or whether some other good books will kick it off its pedestal. I'm going to start reading a few chapters of this tonight. I really like the way this is laid out. I think that having this as an audiobook or an ebook might not do as much justice to this book, because it's written in a style where it has like interview style, where it will have text of like transcripts of an interview, and then it has editor's notes. So I think it's quite playful on the page, which should be quite good. It seems to be quite well received, and this is a brand new copy from the library, and it's lovely. So I'm really excited, and I read a few chapters of Hell of a Book last night on my phone, because it's an ebook, and I quickly got swept up in that. I think the writing was really good, so I think that will be quite easy to read actually. So far all of these books have been really well written, so I've enjoyed them. It's not been a chore to try and get into the stories, which is really good for me. Not that I usually have difficulty with books, but sometimes historical fictions or stories with a lot of backstory sometimes take a little bit of time, but the writing styles are not overly pretentious, so these books have been quite quick to get into. The only thing that I think might be a bit jarring is I know that this book is dealing with the 1970s in America, and Hell of a Book is also in America, but both the protagonists are African American, and I think both of the books will deal with African American identity, which I just don't want to overlap these 2 books on that. So I know this is musical, I know this is meant to be about imaginary fictitious rock stars, and in particular Opal's journey to stardom. And I don't really know anything about Hell of a Book, so I don't actually know what that's going to be about, but I believe it's about a character who's an author trying to sell his book. Sometimes I don't like reading 2 books back to back that are of a similar or same topic, because sometimes you don't feel like you do them as much justice, but it's just the way the cookie crumbled in terms of getting access to these books. So I'm sure that they'll, as I get into them, they'll be completely different in terms of actual plot and genre. But yes, then I'll read The Sentence next, because I got it from Waterstones and I managed to get some stamps for my card for that, so that was quite good, because I was going to wait, but the library had 17 place hold, and I was number 16 or 17, and I don't know if they've even started to be distributed into the libraries yet, so I just didn't want to waste any time with that. And I had an email the other day that Miriam Toews' The Fight Night has been dispatched, so that should come in March. So that's where we're at right now. I will update you when I've read, I think, both the next 2 books. I'm going to read Opal and Nev and Hell of a Book, and then I can compare them together and then put them in the rankings, so you just have something a bit meatier than if I just did the clip when I finish the next one. I think we'll break it up that way so that I can keep this vlog just as one vlog, I think. because that will make it easier for me in terms of editing and getting this out in between uni assessments. So that's it for now, and I'll see you in the next clip. Thank you guys. Hello everyone, and welcome back to this vlog. So I have now finished a hell of a book, and I have finished the final revival of Opal and Nev. So in conclusion, these two weren't the best books that I've read in this category that I had to read, and also I don't think they were one of the best that I've read throughout the whole Booktube prize reading experience. So I'm going to discuss both of those books for you. So hell of a book I struggled with a lot more than the final revival of Opal and Nev. I think what it was trying to do was really interesting. It was talking about race and being a black African American, and it was about the boundaries between reality and fiction, and how fiction is a safer space for that character to discuss those things, and how he was kind of conditioned through his upbringing with his parents and also society to dumb down his blackness and to write more white-centric approved narratives. But the way that that novel was packaged really turned me off it. It was written in quite a strange way, where the character has a condition. He says that he blurs the lines between reality and fiction in his own life, so a lot of characters he can imagine and see that just aren't there. It had this kind of sense of humour about it that I just didn't connect with. It wasn't on the same wavelength, and the character would use repetitive phrases like doll face, and he was drinking quite heavily, and that was part of the narrative, and it's not my kind of book. I just didn't particularly find it engaging or compelling. And then there was another section that was focused on the characters sought to. We don't know if they were a real character or if it's semi-blended into the character of the writer. We don't know whether he was killed by police, but the writer keeps visualising him in his life, and he's trying to tell him that his story needs to be written about what happened to him, the racism and the potential death of him, and their narratives kind of bleed into one another in the book, and it's meant to be kind of a commentary on the fact that black people have an obligation to address these issues of police brutality, black deaths, racism, but I found it a really disconcerting narrative, and a narrative that just didn't engage me, and also I found it quite tedious to read, and it was quite repetitive in parts. It just wasn't my kind of book. People might think it's really clever and genre bending and fascinating, but for me, even it's now a few days since I've read it, my opinion really hasn't changed, and I don't have that much to say about it. So I've rated it a 2.5, and it goes straight to the bottom of the list for this category. The next one was the final revival of Opal and Nev. I've decided, upon thinking about it for a few days, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 stars. Ultimately, this isn't a bad book. The writing was fine, the pacing was okay. The narrative to some people will be compelling. It's a fictional account of a fictional pop duo, rock and roll duo, and it's told in an oral history format. So it has editor's notes, and then it has excerpts of interviews in which Sonny is interviewing Opal, Nev, and people who were in their circle when they were rising to fame. And Sonny has a connection to the Opal and Nev story because her father was the drummer for their band, who, when there was a riot when they were playing sometime in the 70s or 80s, he was killed in the riot that ensued. And so it's kind of been a controversial part of their history, and Sonny wants to document everything and learn more about it. This is very like Daisy Jones and the Six. If you liked that, I think you would like this one. I didn't particularly get on with Daisy Jones and the Six because I found it just boring. I'm not an overtly musical person. I know for a lot of people that defines a lot of their personality, the music choices and the music that they listen to daily. I'm a reader. That's the thing that fascinates me day or night. And music I have to be in the mood for. So narratives about pop stars, rock and roll stars, music, the icon, legendary status of being famous, those kind of things don't compel me in stories. I'm fascinated by relationships between people, family sagas, history of people or a place over a period of time. I like thrillers and mysteries and things like that, so these kind of stories don't compel me anyway. So the bottom line I take away from this novel is it's not a bad book. It was just from the outset not going to be my kind of thing. It was just fairly run-of-the-mill reading experience. I didn't have any issues with reading it. I didn't think the ending was bad or anything like that. I just, from start to finish, didn't click with it in the way that 4 stars and above reads you're just going to naturally click with and enjoy better. This was just a standard 3 out of 5 stars. I was quite a bit disappointed because these 2 books, as soon as I started reading them, I just knew they weren't for me. It's a bit of a shame when that happens because you know you've got to finish them anyway, and particularly a hell of a book I probably would have DNF'd if it wasn't for the challenge, because I found the narrative voice of the writer in that book in particular really irritating, and I was frustrated because both books raise lots of issues on African American identity, things that I really find interesting, but both of those stories were telling them in a way that I didn't find compelling, and that is just my personal preference. I'm not slagging the 2 books off. I'm sure many people have enjoyed both, but it was just a bit disappointing to find 2 books that I kind of instantly knew I didn't like or love. So that means that Opal and Nev go just above Hell of a Book in my rankings. So at the moment we've got Hell of a Book, the final revival of Opal and Nev, Detransition Baby, and then Crossroads. And since I last spoke to you guys, Fight Night has come in. It was delivered over the weekend, so I'm going to crack on with this. I forgot that I've read a Miriam Toews many moons ago. When I was looking at the dust jacket, I remembered that I have read A Complicated Kindness before, and I know Women Talking got quite a buzz. Was it last year on the Booktube prize or the year before? And some people loved it, some people hated it. I've read the inside flap for Fight Night, and I don't know again whether this is a book that I will particularly like. It's alternating between young Swiv and her tenacious grandma. I don't know if it's going to be quite slow and understated. I didn't know what to expect from this anyway. From the cover it didn't really give that much away, so maybe if I read it, it might be one of those books where the dust jacket synopsis doesn't really give the book the justice it deserves, so I'll read it and see, obviously. I'm a bit apprehensive about this one, and then I've just started today reading The Sentence by Louise Erdrich, and I've read about 40 pages, and this is also very strange. Not sure how I'm going to get on with this one. So this category has really thrown me. I didn't know what to expect, and a lot of the titles in this particular category I didn't recognise apart from Detransition Baby anyway, so they were all going to be new to me. But this one is following a individual who is in Minneapolis in America, and she's come out of prison. She's done a sentence for a crime that's quite convoluted and kind of hard to explain. She kind of did something that was illegal without really realising because of her infatuation with somebody else. And she is of Indigenous descent, and it's meant to be a haunting story. I know the premise is that she ends up working at a bookshop and one of the customers dies, and then begins haunting the shop. So I'll keep an open mind and I'll see, because to some extent Hell of a Book was meant to be a haunting narrative about people in his imagination coming into his vision and his life to tell him something, and it didn't gel with the style of how that was structured. I didn't enjoy the characters, I didn't enjoy where that went. I just didn't gel with the overall style of that book at all. This has been interesting, the first 40 pages, but it is way too early to know if this is going to impress me or turn me off the book, or I'm going to gel with it or I'm not. It's way too early to know that yet. But I've got high hopes, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read those two. I don't know whether I'll do them separate or wrap them up together when I've read them, but so far they are my rankings for where 4 of the 6 books have gone, and I will catch up with you at least when I finish the sentence, maybe when I finish both, and then I'll give you my final rankings for this round. But I'll see you in the next clip. Bye now. Hello everyone, so I've just got back from work and I really wanted to film the last video, which is my wrap up thoughts of judging the fiction Octafinals Group A. So I have finally finished The Sentence and Fight Night by Miriam Toews. So I'm going to wrap these up and then do my final rankings for you, and then this video and this round is complete. So I finished The Sentence by Louise Erdrich Friday or Saturday, and we are on Monday now. So I've had a few days to sit with this book. Overall, I was pleasantly impressed with this book. I found things that I really liked about it, and when I finished it I thought that this would be quite hard to rank against the others, especially because Detransition Baby I read so long ago. But what I've decided, I think, is this is going to sit in the 3rd spot. This was really neck and neck with Detransition Baby. But when I put my judging hat on, what I've thought about the criteria is which ones did I enjoy the most, which am I happy to progress forward, and any niggles or issues I had, I have to be a judge that acknowledges those and maybe docks points for those, as opposed to just the initial gut reaction when I finished the book. So this had a few niggles that I think it's best placed under Detransition Baby. And I thought about Jonathan Franzen, and that was a 24-hour audiobook, Crossroads, and I just got through that so quickly. So I have to put that first because it was the most enjoyable book that I read out of the 6 of them. So I think I'm going to rank these books mainly on my enjoyment factor and if there's any outstanding issues. So this one follows Toews, who is an Indigenous bookstore worker. She works at BethChatsBooks, I think that's what it's called, which is Louise Erdrich's own bookstore in Minneapolis. So I thought that was quite a nice tie-in. BethChatsBooks, yeah. And the reason I think this is having to go in 3rd place is the very first part of the book talks about how Toews committed a crime. She moved a body across state lines and she did it for a girl that she liked, and how it landed her in prison. And then when you read the whole rest of the book, that chapter at the beginning becomes very jarring because it's not the sense of Toews as a person that we get. It doesn't really have much to do with the rest of the book. Personally, if I was an editor, I would have asked for it to be removed from the story entirely because it just didn't add anything. There's tentative attempts to try and link it to the rest of the book. I know that Toews gets scared of the ghost that's inhabiting the bookshop called Flora, who was a customer of theirs who, once she died on All Saints' Day in 2019, she just never leaves essentially, and Toews is haunted by her. And they try and reference that's the fact that she's haunted by what she did, and whether this is a type of payback for her. But I really dislike that first chapter a lot, so I think in the end that pushed this book down from a solid 4 to a 3.5/4, and I think that's why it has to go under Detransition Baby, because Detransition Baby and Crossroads were both solid 4s. So that was my main gripe with this book, but I love Toews as a character. She and her husband, who was an Indian cop who actually gets her arrested at the beginning of the novel, but then they reunite when she comes out. They have such a cute relationship. I love the references to the indigenous culture, and I love the references to the bookshops, the conversation she has with other customers, and all the books she recommends. I kept screenshotting pages of these books because it had lists of books that people would recommend, or that Toews would recommend to people, or other bookshop staff would recommend to customers, and then customers said that they liked, and so there was loads and loads of recommendations for books in here. Some I've read, majority of them I haven't, so I just kept screenshotting them so I could keep them and add them onto my Goodreads to be read list. So if you've been following my Goodreads at the moment, you'll have noticed that I've just added a lot of books onto the want to be read pile on Goodreads. Loved all the references to the books and being in a bookshop. I did actually quite enjoy the haunting, Flora's haunting of the bookshop. I thought that was quite fun, and usually I'm a little bit more of a realist reader and find kind of hauntings a little bit eye-rolling, but I think this was done in a really nice literary way, and this book also convinced me that maybe haunting narratives I might quite enjoy, and I liked it mentioned some really big events that happened when the book was set. So it was 2019 through to 2020. It does a kind of year look at Toews and her family and their life, which crosses through the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and also the death of George Floyd, which happened in Minneapolis, where the book is set. So it doesn't shy away from some hard-hitting topics, but it was a really interesting way that the narrative was done. It reflected on the Indigenous experience in America and also the Black African American experience in America, and how they're quite similar, and there's a lot of reference to being haunted and how the community, the Indigenous community, is constantly haunted by the land that it's taken from them. Some really interesting things in here. I don't think it will be everybody's cup of tea, but the way it actually was packaged interested me. I found the writing really compelling as well. I think I will go back and read this author's backlist because I know she's a prolific writer who's really well respected. And The Night Watchman was the winner of the Pulitzer Prize. So I'll go and pick that up next because I found the writing unputdownable. Really, it was really easy to get through. And Toews was a really interesting character. I just think the first chapter let her down a little bit, and it felt like I was reading two very different characters. But I loved the funny drama of when Hetty comes to stay, who is her husband's niece, but in the community they treat them like their own children. And I think she lost her parents, so he's kind of like her adoptive dad. And the hilarious tension between Hetty and Toews, because they love each other but they also are too similar and squabble all the time. I really liked that. And Hetty's relationship, or Hetty's, I can't remember whether it's Hetty or Hetty's now, but either way, with other characters and people that worked in the bookshop, and yeah, I really, really enjoyed this book. I just think because the niggle of the first chapter, it just deducted that half a point, which made it easier to put it as number 3, but I really enjoyed this book. It's not a criticism of the book in terms of the fact that I would recommend this to people. I think it's really interesting. I'm not sure if it's a flavour too bizarre for my mother, but I might give it to her and see if she enjoys it. But I like the kind of quirkiness of this book, and I definitely think it should be in the top 3 out of these 6. and should go through to the next round. So there's that one. Then I read Fight Night by Miriam Toews, and to be honest, reading it, saying I've read it is a bit of a stretch. I followed the general plot. To be honest, about 50 pages in, I found that I hated the voice, so I skim read a lot of it. It's only 250 pages, so luckily for me it wasn't that hard to get through. This follows Swiv and her grandma. I found the voice it's meant to be of a teenager really precocious and irritating. It reminded me a little bit of A Complicated Kindness, which is one of her other novels, and I read it many years ago and I thought it was really interesting, that story. It was about a Mennonite community. But I think she sticks to what she knows, because I'm pretty sure that she's mentioned that kind of community before. I know she's a Canadian author, but she's kind of also had young teenage protagonists narrating the stories before, so this didn't feel particularly refreshing or new for me. This is ground that I think has been covered before. It also reminded me a lot of The Discomfort of Evening, which won the International Man Booker Prize a few years ago. Very similar, like both characters are obsessed with having difficulties passing bowel movements, and they are fascinated by the adults who they feel really detached from, who seem to, in this book in particular, Swiv finds it difficult because her grandma and her mum talk a lot about sex, which she finds repulsive. And I know in A Discomfort of Evening, that character was obsessed with adult conversations, and very visceral descriptions are in both books of things like bowel movements, phlegm, blood, which I think is a quirky trend in novels at the moment, but doesn't do anything for me. So I found Swiv annoying, and her grandma, they both weren't well-rounded characters, so any adventure that happened or any development, it didn't particularly interest me. It hinged on the fact that their mother had some mental health issues, Swiv's mother, and so grandma takes a lot of the strain of raising Swiv, and she's curious, and grandma has a lot of energy to answer her questions, and they're quite both eccentric characters, and her mum spends a lot of time resting because she's pregnant, and she seems quite depressed, and then, you know, the end of the book is the birth of the new baby. But the plot was non-existent, the narrative wasn't engaging or compelling, I didn't like the characters, they weren't developed very well, so I didn't actually care what happened. So to me that makes it an entirely pointless book and reading experience for me. Other people might think this is genius. I just found it terribly, terribly boring, so I will definitely not be keeping this copy either, because I have no interest, and I think that's really where I'm going to put Miriam Toews to bed for a little bit. I did want to read the book before this one that was on the Booktube prize a year ago or 2 years ago, called Women Talking, which that again got mixed reviews on by the community, the Booktube community, but the plot sounded like something I'd be interested in. However, let me know if it's exactly the same in style to this and A Complicated Kindness, because if it is, I will skip it, I'm not that bothered. So in the end, I had to make the decision, which book did I hate more, Hell of a Book or Fight Night? The decision was made ultimately to put this at the bottom and Hell of a Book just above it, for the reason that Hell of a Book raised some interesting points about race and the complicated political climate in the US at the moment, and this conversation of a white narrative. And some bits of it I found I could get into and read, and then other things just took me out of it. But this I genuinely struggled to read, and I haven't had an issue of wanting to put a book down in a very long time, but I really wanted to put this down. So I think it just has to go at the bottom. I did not enjoy this at all. So my final rankings for the Booktube prize are: in 6th place is Fight Night by Miriam Toews. In 5th place is Hell of a Book by Jason Mott. In 4th place is the final revival of Opal and Nev by Dawnie Walton. Yeah, I think it's Dawnie Walton. Number 3, The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. Number 2, Detransition Baby by Torrey. And at number 1 is Jonathan Franzen's Crossroads. So I hope you like this video and this vlog, and that you enjoyed all of my thoughts about these books. I feel like I didn't talk about them in as much detail as I usually do, but I hope you got the gist of why I've justified where things have gone, where they've gone. I really enjoyed judging this round, and hopefully I'll be picked as a judge for the next few rounds, but I am under the impression that Robert is making sure that anybody that missed out on the Octafinals will automatically be a judge for the next round, so that might mean I might not be required. But I will always put my interest down if he emails me and asks me, so we'll see. So I might not be around for the next round, it might be the round after that, but I really enjoyed judging this round, and I found it really interesting that there were some books I didn't gel with, because most of the books for the past 2 years, it's been hard to rank them because I've enjoyed them, but that isn't to say that non-fiction and translated fiction might not be a challenge for me in a whole other way. And I love judging this prize because you get books that challenge you, books that you don't like, books that you do like, and it really helps you learn more about your own reading preference, and I love hearing other people's thoughts as well. So anyway, waffle over. Hopefully I'll be back again to do another vlog to judge any of the rounds for any of the categories. If I am, I'll see you again soon, but thank you guys so much for watching, and hopefully there'll be another video soon.